We were recently invited to Konami HQ to play Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes and take part in a roundtable interview with Metal Gear developers Hideo Kojima and Yoji Shinkawa. In this special video, we're going to present a series of questions and answers with Mr. Kojima and Mr. Shinkawa and throw in small pieces of trivia about the Metal Gear Solid 5 games. The big thing that people are talking about is the length of the main mission in Ground Zeroes, and that sort of became an issue. It seems like Konami's PR people were sort of caught off guard by the reaction to this. Did you know people were going to react this way? And why did you design the game to be concise? Ideally, I would have wanted to release the prologue, Ground Zeroes, and the main game, The Phantom Pain, as a set together, or at least release them at the same time. The main game is roughly 200 times the size of the prologue. Given the length and scale of the game, it was impossible for us to have it ready by the time the next generation platforms launched. We spoke to a lot of people and thought that this would be an ideal moment to release a Japanese high-end game. It wasn't necessarily a strategic move where we thought too much about it, we just wanted people with next generation consoles to experience what we were creating. We did have fears that people would think the prologue was short, but this was not originally the plan. We just wanted to give people a taste of what we're creating right now. Another thing is we were fairly confident that despite the possibility of the game feeling short, it has a lot of replay value. We're very confident that the more times you play through Ground Zeroes, the more places you'll find, as well as new ways to enjoy it and have fun. Why is it important that this is a high-end Japanese game compared to just a high-end game in general? Do you think that matters to Western gamers or Japanese gamers? This is something that we have in Japan. People aren't playing too many PC games right now, or too many high-end games. They're focusing more on games that you can play on your smartphone, or social games. With the PS4 being launched in Japan at the end of this month, we don't have too many high-end games that were created in Japan. We have a lot of Western games. I had this fear, this concern, that in Japan, not a lot of Western music is being heard nowadays, and not many English movies are being watched. I wanted to make sure that Japanese people had something within this new generation of technology that they could relate to. We were also told that for Ground Zeroes, every soldier in the game has a unique appearance. Their faces, which are taken from real photos, only appear once per game. Besides the open world stuff, there's a lot of new gameplay elements at work in Ground Zeroes. I was wondering if you could talk about some of the games that you look to for inspiration in adding things? This might be an answer that might upset you a little bit. People are not necessarily happy when they hear my answer. The honest truth is that lately I haven't played too many games, so I'm not sure of any specific games that I've taken inspiration from or have tried to imitate. That said, of course, for the controls, so far until this point Metal Gear had very unique controls. They were very friendly for people who were used to Metal Gear games, but for people that were used to other games, they were controls that were difficult to get used to. In that regard, we tried to make some standard controls so that more people could relate to the controls. As far as the games go, I haven't played too many games lately. More than that, I've been reading a lot of novels and watching a lot of movies. The feelings I get, I try to reflect onto the game. The marking system is something that I didn't necessarily want to put in the game, but once we played the game, we saw that enemies were coming from all around you, 360 degrees. The enemy can spot you from any position, and this made it very challenging as a player. It's not something that we wanted to put in, but we had to aid the player to balance the difficulty somehow. People always expect sequels to be bigger. Do you ever worry that you're raising the bar too high? That you might not be able to create a game bigger and more impressive than The Phantom Pain down the road? I honestly don't think too much ahead of time. I'm always trying to create the best I can. I always try to stay within the limits of how far I can go. When I created Metal Gear Solid 4, I was very sure that I wouldn't be able to create anything bigger and better than that. With The Phantom Pain, I'm going with something that's much bigger. Something that has a completely different scale. So thinking beyond that right now is very difficult for me. Right now, with The Phantom Pain, I'm working with a very big team to create this game. I'm thinking, oh god, after this game, I want to create more games with a smaller team. But I'm sure once I'm done with The Phantom Pain, my mind will change and I'll jump into something different. I'm that busy with my current projects that I can't think too much ahead of time. Metal Gear Solid 5 was developed under the codename Project Ogre. Kojima told Video magazine, "At the time, I couldn't even talk about the 5th episode of Metal Gear. That's why I called it Project Ogre. The name was chosen to leave clues about what would happen in the game, because there is a kind of ogre in the game." What are your major comedy influences, and when do you decide to use the comedy in such a serious game? Metal Gear is a series that puts a lot of stress on the player for extended periods of time. It makes you very tense. I used to watch a lot of Hitchcock movies. In his movies, it's very characteristic that there'll be a scary setting, but then he'll make you laugh. Then he leaps to the next scary setting, and he balances all these waves of emotions that you go through in the movies. I wanted to create something similar, in that you're not tense all the time while playing the game, trying to create a rhythm. I'm not sure if there are elements that you can laugh at, but certainly elements that will relieve the stress. And then, again, put you into more tense situations, then relieve it. Create a kind of rhythm. I tried to put in gimmicks that enable this balance. Some of the quirkier elements of Metal Gear, like knocking on the walls, the cardboard boxes, and hiding in the lockers, seems to have been removed. Why is this, and will these elements also be absent from the Phantom Pain? You've probably already completed the main mission in Ground Zeroes, so as you were able to see, the theme for this game is rather heavy, a rather dark theme. When I tried to put in elements like the cardboard box, it kind of broke the serious tone that I was trying to relate to in the game, so I had to take them out. That said, the cardboard boxes are very iconic in the Metal Gear series. I myself missed them. The cardboard boxes will be in the Phantom Pain, but in a way that they don't conflict with the tone of the game. The same goes for all these other quirky, funny elements that are characteristics of Metal Gear games. I'm trying to include them, maybe not with the same frequency that they appeared in previous games, as that would be rather challenging, but in smaller submissions. As long as they don't break the tone of the game, I will try and put these elements back in the game. Mr. Kojima also mentioned that they didn't create any fantastical, cool-looking buildings that you'd usually see in Metal Gear games. As you can see in the background of some of Ground Zero's promotional art, it's much more of a realistic-looking base. He's also stated that in the Phantom Pain, you will have your own base. In one of the trailers for Ground Zeroes, it mentions that we're able to implement accurate spotlight lighting into the game because of the power of the next-generation consoles, and that you originally intended to have this feature in earlier games. Is there anything else that's been implemented into Ground Zeroes that you plan to implement into earlier games, but weren't able to because of technical limitations? One of the things I always wanted to achieve was to have a scrolling seamless world that keeps appearing on the horizon. This is something I've always wanted to do, and in this game we were able to put it in. Metal Gear is a stealth game, and back then on the MSX you could only have one screen at a time. But I originally wanted to have one big area where the player just searches and looks at the map, decides how to infiltrate, what strategy to take, what route to take, what equipment to take, executes the mission, and then figures out their own means of escape. This is what I originally wanted to make. A couple of other things I was able to achieve here was being able to call the helicopter anywhere you want so that you could decide when and where to escape from. Because of the hardware advantages, the physical calculations were possible to put these kinds of elements in the game. Specifically for the spotlights. All the spotlights we put into the game are made by physical calculations. It looks the same way in the game as it would look if you took an actual spotlight and spot it in a field or a park. In previous Metal Gear games we had to draw the light and the shadows by hand. Because of the power we have to work with now, we're able to shine the light using physics in an accurate way. When you look at the Metal Gear series going into the open world genre for the first time, do you see this as where the franchise needed to change, or do you see this as a new way for the series to try and change what people think about when it comes to open world games? That's a question that I often get. One thing that I want to make clear, it's not that we saw games going open world like GTA and said, oh yeah, that's what we have to do. I myself think we just tried to add more freedom to the stealth the player will be able to experience. In order to add that freedom, we put in more options for expression. I don't think we've necessarily changed the genre of the series. The Phantom Pain will be roughly 200 times as big as Ground Zeroes. Within that, I want people to think, well, I have to go here. What's the strategy? How do I get there? What vehicle do I take? Do I use a horse or a car or walk? The time will change, the weather will change, so it'll make a difference. What vehicle you take does make a difference. What time you get to your destination, daytime or nighttime, you have to make a different strategy. We wanted to give players the freedom to exploit the game system. That's what we wanted to achieve. Whenever we use the term open world, people will think of GTA, for example, but what we're aiming for here is fairly different from what others are creating. The watch used in the Metal Gear Solid 5 E3 2013 trailer is a Seiko G757 5020 Sports 100. This watch is also used by Roger Moore in the James Bond movie Octopussy. You're overseeing the production of multiplayer in Los Angeles. What is the most important and biggest leap that you've noticed in terms of Metal Gear Online regarding the new open world direction? Although it's mainly being developed in the LA studio, several core members of our Tokyo studio that were involved in the original Metal Gear Online are also working with them. They're working together, Japan and LA. I guess the main leap would be that Metal Gear Online was a very successful online game in Japan, but worldwide, I don't consider it a success in Europe and in North America. Only so many people played the game. I guess it was more difficult for people in Europe, North America and other continents to relate to it. With that in mind, this time I wanted to have staff from all over the world working on it so that more people can relate to the game. I'm really thinking about people all over the world being able to come, try this game and have fun with it. The tough part about this answer is that I don't want people to translate this back to Japanese, because this might upset them. Most core users of Metal Gear Online in Japan are still giving a lot of criticism, saying, why are you creating the online mode in LA? You should develop it in Japan. Our main goal going into this online mode in Metal Gear Solid 5 is creating an online mode that everyone will be able to enjoy. We're trying to make all the necessary adjustments by trial and error, having everyone work together. In the past, you've spoken about having sensitive or uncomfortable material and situations in Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain. We've seen the hospital massacre, and now we've seen everything happening at the end of the main mission. Why do you think those kinds of events are important or necessary to Metal Gear Solid 5? More than just thinking about sensitive things, if we don't cross a line and make those attempts to really express what we want to express, games will only be games. If we don't try to go beyond that, we won't be able to achieve what movies or novels have achieved. That is, to try and go beyond what the original media was supposed to be. I didn't want to stay away from things that could be considered sensitive and censor what I originally wanted to convey. If we don't go that far, games will never be considered as culture. For example, in Breaking Bad, I can see those guys are trying to go to the limit, take it as far as they can, try to always get their message across. For us as well, in games we have to go to a limit. We want to stay within this limit of how far we can push the boundaries while conveying our message. We don't look around and don't see too many games like this, and that's unfortunate. I don't necessarily think that all games have to go this far. In our case, we have a strong message that we want to convey. One of the main topics of Metal Gear Solid 5 is the chain of revenge. That specific scene you mentioned that happens towards the end, that becomes the ground zero for a lot of the events that will come afterwards. That's something that I really didn't want to step back from. I know that I'll probably face a lot of criticism because of it, but I really wanted to portray that. With regards to the Moby Dick Studios thing, what was the significance of that? During the original trailer as well, there were a lot of references and quotes from the book. Does this have something to do with the revenge aspect of the game? That's a very difficult question to answer. I can only say that Moby Dick is a big part of the theme for Metal Gear Solid 5. I can only say that your feelings are pretty accurate. You'll see a lot of that, and because of that, it's difficult to go into detail. The demo that Hideo Kojima showed at GDC 2013 for the Phantom Pain starts with the words, "Okay, Ahab, time to go." A bandaged man then turns and runs to Snake, saying, "You can call me Ishmael." Snake is also revealed to have a prosthetic left arm, and in the actual trailer for the game you can see a large flaming whale. These are all allusions to the novel Moby Dick. The main character in Moby Dick is called Captain Ahab, and the first words in the book are, "You can call me Ishmael." Ahab also has a wooden leg, and he's hunting the whale that took it from him. A lot of the time when people do open world games, the games end up directionless and people get sidetracked. Metal Gear has always been a very story-driven series. How do you balance this open world aspect and story in the Phantom Pain? Let's say that the games in the Metal Gear series so far have been one big movie. With Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, think of them as not one big movie, but as a series of episodes. A TV series through 10, 20, or any number of episodes will tell one overarching story. In this big open world, the player will be able to go anywhere and can focus on very small submissions such as collecting bounties, but in each episode there is one main mission where the goal is very clear. The player will have the freedom to do any of these main missions, and through clearing these main missions, one bigger story will come together. I'm trying a different take on storytelling from what I've been doing so far. It's not that there won't be any story, but the way I'm telling the story, I'm trying to make something different from what I've done in the past. Metal Gear is known for long and frequent cutscenes. Ground Zeroes doesn't have too many of those, but there is a lot of backstory that's relegated to cassette tapes that you can listen to as you play. What motivated the decision to leave a lot of the story in those cassettes? Well, it's not only the cassette tapes. In the main game, you'll see other story elements not in Ground Zeroes. The reason I took this approach was because, in the past, we tried to tell a lot of the story through the cutscenes. They make it easier to add dramatic elements and to convey more of a specific mood or ambiance that we want to show. By making the game open world, using the cutscenes wasn't ideal because we'd have a lot of cutscenes that people would never see, as not all people would go to a certain place. I didn't want to force them. During the mission, I want people to have as much freedom as possible. During the briefing of each mission, there should be a cutscene explaining things, but during the mission, I wanted to spread small pieces of information all over. Small cutscenes not everyone would have to see, or tapes, or other items that tell part of the story. Most people will have different experiences. I want people to tie the stories together in their head and come up with their own story. I believe this level of depth will be effective depending on how you play the game. That's the storytelling method I want to try with this game. Chronologically, we're quickly approaching the point in which Big Boss stops being a good person and becomes the villain that we've known him to be for 25 years. Is that something that you're interested in exploring in Ground Zeroes, the Phantom Pain, or beyond? We're making the game in a way that all you guys will be able to understand and be satisfied with the explanation that we give for how Big Boss evolves into the character he is today. It's rather difficult to create a story that has a predefined ending that you all already know. Ideally, I would like to sit out and focus on other characters. They don't even necessarily need to be in the Metal Gear universe. Creating stories that don't have these kinds of restrictions, where you know how it has to end, can be a lot easier. In Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, the voice of Big Boss will be performed by Kiefer Sutherland rather than David Hayter. Kiefer Sutherland was actually recommended to Kojima for the role of Big Boss by Avi Arad, the man who was directing the Metal Gear Solid movie. If you'd like to watch more Metal Gear related videos, check out our Metal Gear Solid Easter egg series, or you can check out my Metal Gear Solid mini retrospective where I cover the first 3 of the series. We'd like to give a huge thank you to Aaron Egoraptor Hansen for giving us a few clips of his own footage to use, and of course a huge thank you to Konami themselves. As always, thanks for watching, and if you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe.